So, as Ian Hislop said, just because you lose an election or you lose a referendum, you are allowed to go on making the argument. That is the whole point of democracy, and the reason why Brexiteers get so upset is because they don't want people pointing out what's going wrong. That there are facts on their side. In fact, there was a very recent conversation on this channel, which I think I am going to make a video of, just showing how that is true. Brexiteers can't argue with reality and when facts are brought up against them. So I might do that as a video. But yeah, on to today's thing. So Remainers aren't going to vanish on the 31st of January. We'll fight on, sure of our cause, because we all know it's going to be a disaster. We've been talking about it. We know the statistics. We know no good will come of it. So when the European Deputy Chair says that UK will end up rejoining the European Union, yeah. It doesn't make economic sense to not be in the European Union. So in less than 3 weeks, Britain leaves the EU. Those vast marches, the crowded public meetings, the indefatigable Remain campaigners, the great speeches, the parliamentary wheeling and dealing, the principled resignations, they were all for nothing. The Get Brexit Done Tories, exploiting the least electable Labour leader ever, won the election and were handed an 80-seat majority. The die is now cast. For the political class, the issue has become toxic. Boris Johnson wants Brexit expunged from the lexicon, so that the new normal is for Britain to be wholly outside the EU. Labour, flattened by its epic defeat, is agreed that to be pro-EU is political death. Remain Britain, half the population has no champion. It is the first order political miscalculation. The Conservative Party created Brexit. It must own it. Labour, after 2015, made two monumental miscalls. Firstly, not sufficiently opposing austerity, and the latter voting for Article 50. There must be no repeat now. Brexit must be opposed in every dimension. This is a Conservative project. The Tories must be the sole sponsor and live with the consequences. I think it will break them. Boris Johnson's first acquaintance with the new reality was in the balmy air of the Mesquite, where he learned that Donald Trump had assassinated Iran's general. British service personnel and nationals in the Middle East were suddenly exposed to the risk of deadly reprisals alongside the risk to British economic and commercial assets, as were those of the French and Germans. There was one option: organise phone calls with Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel and issue a joint European statement resisting an endorsement of the attack and calling urgently for collective restraint. Little Dominic Raab granted a fleeting audience with the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was, when he babbled the US propaganda, overhauled by Johnson. It was the first of many humiliations ahead. Britain is too exposed, too economically and militarily weak, and too European in its interests to have a foreign policy consistently independent of the EU. Economically, financially, and commercially and culturally, it will be the same story. It is unlikely there will be one single event that catalyzes in the crisis in our shattered relationship with the continent. Rather, it will be a slow, cumulative drip, drip, drip of bad news and disillusioning personal experiences. By the end of 2020, Brexit will have cost Britain approximately £130 billion of output, reckons the Bloomberg Economics. But from 2021, Conservative refusal to accept the economic reality that Britain can only protect its dense European supply networks by agreeing to continue to implement EU regulations in every sector will mean frozen new investments and escalating closures, especially in its critical auto, aerospace, drugs and chemical food and drink industries. Expect the Japanese car makers to pull out first, then Airbus will surely follow. The much touted trade deal with the US, China, and India, even if achievable on remotely equal terms, cannot compensate for the lost European markets, especially as the Americans, Chinese, and Indians have zero intention of opening up their service sectors to British exporters, where we do not have the same strengths. Where we do have some strengths. It is in this context that growth can only remain depressed and our current account deficit fantastically high. The risk of a run on the sterling is ever present, dependent, as Mark Carney, the outgoing governor of the Bank of England, memorably said, on the kindness of strangers whom the government so actively disdains. Given all that, Johnson and Savage Javid's attempt to launch a decade of renewal, in particular by trying to relieve the failing towns in the Midlands and the North, is once again incoherent babbling. Meanwhile, the dynamic liberal populations of our growing innovative cities will look back on EU membership with its commitment to openness and bringing the continent together with fondness and mounting regret. In Northern Ireland and Scotland, there will be determined attempts to do something about it, campaigning bitterly to split from the Tory England. The EU extraordinarily is about to become very popular. England too will move in that direction, but it will be more jerky. There can be no renewal without reconfiguring our capitalism so that there is more European stakeholder character accompanied by an active state and city government. Johnson is condemned not to use Brexit to complete. Johnson is condemned not to use Brexit to complete the Thatcher revolution as his Tory right wing want, but paradoxically to Europeanise the British economy to try and bring prosperity to the party's new electoral base beyond the south. He will find that if he is to halt the exodus of inward investment, a crucial prop-up to the towns that he wants to help, he is going to have to find some face-saving way of aligning with EU regulations. Here, the EU, if it shows some deftness, can construct a series of custom-made British arrangements. There will have to be some style-landing bilateral councils on defence, cybersecurity, terrorism, and climate change. There will also need the unanswerable to be answerable on both sides. Similarly, if the UK wants to retain a semblance of its manufacturing industry alongside trying to grow service industries as desperate as advertising and insurance broking, it will have to follow a shared European single market rules to allow market access. It will be a variable geometry Europe, wherein the UK is seen as the uneasy outlier. It will also be unsustainable and unsatisfactory, and calls to drop the half-in, half-out relationship will emerge, followed by calls to fully rejoin, not at least to keep Britain together. Britain, chastened by its exile and more European in its economic and social model, will find the EU membership the second time around much easier. All of this is inevitable, and the only question is whether it will take 5 or 15 years, depending on how quickly the Labour Party or its successor can capture and successfully exploit the new political currents. So, at 11 p.m. on the 31st of January, dismiss Johnson's extravagant claims for what lies ahead in the fax celebrations. Light a candle in a window at your door or in your garden and find friends and do it together. We will stand for a European Britain, and we will be back. I've said it before, it's going to happen. It's only a matter of when, and it's not going to be that long. Everyone has put it between 5 to 15 years. We will be back in Europe sooner rather than later.